Good evening. It has been asked of me to share with you the saga of Fred and Flash. Now, before we go too much further, you need to know that I have alienated my family by telling this joke. I have completely cleared many a room by telling this joke. I have received death threats for the telling of this joke. So, as I begin to tell this joke, know what it is you're getting into. This may be the worst joke I've ever told.
It is.
There was once two racehorses. One was named Fred and one was named Flash, and they were brothers. They grew up in the bluegrass of Kentucky. They were fine specimens, and they had marvelous racing careers. And throughout their entire career, every race they ran, every single race they ran, Flash would come in first place, and Fred would come in second. The bookmakers hated it because it made the odds of achieving the trifecta that much easier, because Flash would come in first and Fred would come in second. And that was the story of their entire career. As their career began to come to an end, they were down to the last three races of their career. And before the third to the last race, Fred came over to Flash and he said, "Flash, we've had a phenomenal career as horses of race. And every single race you have come in first place, and I have come in second place, and I'm good with that. I'm good with that. But just once, I would love to win a race. So I'm asking you as my brother, as my friend, as my lifelong companion, could I win this next race?" And Flash turns to Fred and he says, "Fred, of course." He said, "I am your brother. If this is your wish, if this is your desire, I want nothing more than to fulfill that. So the next race, you will win the race." Fred was ecstatic. You could almost imagine how excited he was. And as the horses lined up in the gate and the gun was fired, the horses began to run, and Fred was out in the lead. He had a good 2 lengths on his brother Flash, and they came around the bend, and Fred was winning. He was beating Flash in the race, and they came in to the final straightaway, and then seemingly from out of nowhere, Flash passes Fred and wins the race. We can only imagine how distraught, how upset Fred was. And he went over to Fred and he said, "Fred, he said, you promised me you would let me win this race, and at the last possible moment you beat me. You took this race from me. And Flash said to Fred, I don't know what came over me. He goes, it was force of habit. He goes, it's all I've ever known to win. He said, I apologize sincerely as your brother. I would ask for your forgiveness. And being the good brother that Fred was, Fred forgave Flash, but at the same time he said, there's only 2 races left in our career. Please, Flash, let me win the next race. And so time went by, and it was time for their penultimate race. And Fred eases over to Flash and he says, Flash, remember, you made me a promise. You made me a promise that I would win this race. That you would let me win at least one race in my career. And Flash says to Fred, he says, Fred, of course, he goes, I cannot apologize enough for the last race, but this race, my brother, you will win. And so the horses line up in the gate, and the pistol goes off, and the gate opens, and the horses begin to run. It was a sloppy track. There had been rain. It was a sloppy track. But Fred loved to run in the slop, and Fred was way out ahead of the pack. He was by far in the lead. Lengths and lengths and lengths. And they came around the bend, and Fred was in the lead, and they went into the final straightaway, and Fred glanced over his shoulder. He was so far in the lead, he knew there was no way he could possibly lose this race. And suddenly, at the last possible second, Flash passed him. Yes, Flash passed him and defeated his brother once again. His brother to whom he had made promises, his brother to whom he had broken promises. And so time goes by, and it's now the final race. The final race of the duo of Fred and Flash. And at the last moment, Fred walks over to Flash and he says, Flash, he says, this is my last possible chance to win a race in my entire career. Please, as my brother, I am begging you, let me win this race. And Flash, with tears in his eyes, turns to his brother and he says, Fred, I am so sorry. I am so sorry for the promises that I have made and the promises I have broken. But this race, the last race of our career, this race, my friend, my brother, this race is yours. And so the horses line up in the gate, and the gun is fired, and the gates tear open, and the horses begin to run, and Fred is so far out in the lead. Flash Flash is there in the gate. He still hasn't left the gate, and the horses begin to run. It is a beautiful day. The sky is blue. The sun is shining. The track is dry. And Fred is galloping. Galloping like he's never galloped before, and he's out there so far in front of all the other racehorses, out there in the lead. And they come around the last bend, and they come into the straightaway, and there's not a horse that is anywhere close to Fred. And then seemingly from out of nowhere at the last possible moment, Flash passes Fred and defeats him. Defeats his brother yet again, despite the promises made. Flash beats Fred yet again. Well, Fred is distraught. Fred does not talk to his brother for years. Years go by, and they have been put out to pasture, to stud, or whatever it is they do with old racehorses. And one day on the way to the watering trough, Fred and Flash, despite Fred's best efforts to avoid his brother, Fred runs into Flash and he says, Flash, he says, I have to tell you how upset I am about the promises made, the promises broken, the fact I've never won a race, and you, as my brother, lied to me time and time and time again, and my life feels like a waste. And here I am. Here I am, nothing but an old loser. And Flash says to Fred, he says, Fred, what if you and I have a race here today? Let's race around this pasture. Let's race, and we will find out who the better horse is. Well, Fred has been keeping himself in pretty good shape, and he's excited at the prospect of racing his brother Fred. And so they set up a starting point, and all the barnyard animals gather around the pasture, and the horses, they begin to run. And to be honest, Flash has let himself go. Flash is not the horse he once was, and the horses begin to run, and Fred is way out in the lead, and the barnyard animals are cheering and they are shouting, and Fred, it looks like he's going to win this race. They come around through the final curve, they come in to the straightaway, and seemingly from out of nowhere, Flash beats his brother Fred yet again. Now, you can only imagine how upset, how distraught Fred is. And he walks off into the corner of the pasture to be by himself, to weep like any of us would weep, to shed that final tear of defeat as any of us would shed that tear of defeat. And Flash feels terrible. Flash walks over towards his brother to say some words, and a dog meets Flash on the way to talk with Fred. And the dog says to Flash, he says, Flash, you had all these chances over the years to let your brother win a race, but somehow you couldn't find it within yourself to let your brother win, to give your brother that victory, to give your brother that sense of accomplishment. And Flash turns to Fred and he says, "Hey Fred, look, it's a talking dog."
Boo.